What's up, duelists? Finally, the ultimate guide to dragons in Edison format. Everything you need to know to play the dragon decks of Edison format is here. Of course, these videos take a little bit of prep, a little bit of time, so I would appreciate if you guys left a like, left a comment, subscribed, that whole thing. Let's go ahead and get right into things. This is a big amount of material. That's not the right words, but you get the idea. One of the most important cards you need to understand in Edison format dragons is Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. Now this guy has a different effect in 2010, aka in Edison format, than he does in Yu-Gi-Oh today. So if you're a bit newer to Edison format in general, you gotta know about the original printing of Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. Here it is right here. The effect says you can remove from play one dragon type monster you control to special summon this card. Keep in mind the dragon type monster has to be face up. Keep in mind that this means from the hand, not from your deck, not from the graveyard, etc. Then the second part of the effect says, once per turn, you can special summon one dragon-type monster except Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon from your hand or graveyard. So it is a soft once per turn effect. You can use multiple of these guys in the same turn. This is the biggest difference from the current errata of this card. And you can also special summon multiple of these guys each turn. So it's very important to understand this card. This is the one card that pretty much is played in every single dragon deck. And the other card that you also need to understand is this guy right here, Future Fusion. Again, this card also has a different effect in 2010, aka Edison format, than it does today. The effect that it has in Edison format is send from your deck to the graveyard fusion materials that are listed on a fusion monster card and select that one fusion monster from your extra deck. Special summon the selected fusion monster during your second standby phase after this card's activation. This special summon is treated as a fusion summon. When this card is removed from the field, destroy that monster. When the monster is destroyed, destroy this card. So the biggest difference here is that when you activate this, if this card resolves as part of the effect, you will send those fusion materials from your deck to the graveyard immediately. The change to Future Fusion in these days is that it sends it on a later turn. So important to note that these two cards are different in 2010. They function very differently, and both of these cards are going to be seen in every dragon deck list that I show you today. So the way this deck works, let's go ahead and just go over a basic strategy, as is the course for these ultimate guide videos. I'm doing this in one take, by the way. In the past, I've edited them, but that's a pain in the ass, so we're not doing that today. The way this deck works is it looks to abuse Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon, bringing back powerful dragons from the graveyard, or cheating them into play from your hand, kind of like a sneak attack if you've played Magic the Gathering. And then, of course, utilizing Future Fusion by revealing the fusion monster 5-headed dragon, which we'll show here in a second, to send 5 dragon-type monsters from your deck to the graveyard. Now, there's a lot of different ways to abuse that power. It's basically a painful choice that summons a 5,000 monster in 2 turns, so this is easily the best spell card in all of Edison format. And it's part of the reason why dragons are probably the best or one of the best decks in all of Edison format. Let's go ahead and take a look at some lists. I have 6 different dragon lists. Now, there's a lot of variation between dragon decks in this format. There's a lot of different ways you can approach this because, again, there's just such a deep card pool. You can play any of the legal dragons. Dragons are one of the most common monsters in the format. The first list I want to show you is a list that MMF had piloted to some success in earlier Edison format times when the format was still picking up in popularity. I think like 2019, 2020, around that time. This is a quick draw dragons list. This is one of the ways you can approach this deck. You've got Cards of Consonance, trade in Upstart Goblin to make sure you consistently see Future Fusion, Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. You've got the quick draw plant sort of mini engine with Lone Fire Titanial, as well as Debris, Dandelion, and Quick Draw. The strength of this deck, as opposed to the other dragon decks, is that Debris Dragon makes dragon-type synchro monsters like Stardust and Black Rose, and then Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon can reanimate those synchros if they ever get beat. So it's a really powerful strategy, a lot of inherent raw strength in this deck. The biggest issue with this deck, and partially why it's fallen out of popularity, is it is very inconsistent. You'll oftentimes draw halves of your engine that don't really do anything together. You'll draw like Titanial Blue Eyes, and then you'll draw like a Cards of Consonance and a Red Man, and your hand just does nothing. So it's a bit inconsistent. You have to draw the right half of your deck at the right time, but when you do, it's one of the most powerful decks in the format. You can abuse Mind Control in this list because you do have Whitestone as a tuner, as well as Debris Dragon as a tuner. You can also abuse Mind Control to take an opposing, let's say, Stardust Dragon, and then banish it for your Red Eyes Darkness Metal. So there's a lot of strength there. You get to play the 2 most powerful spell cards other than Future Fusion, which I think are Brain Control and Mind Control. So yeah, it's just a deck chock full of powerful cards. In the sideboard, you get to play stuff like Light and Darkness Dragon, extra copies of Kawaki Mero Drago. We're going to talk about him in a bit. So yeah, we're gonna breeze through this list. I think it doesn't see as much play nowadays, but it is a really strong list, and it's definitely one to consider if you like having fun and like having insane turns where you like summon Drill Warrior, summon Debris Dragon, make Stardust Dragon, banish the Stardust Dragon for Red Eyes Special, a Blue Eyes White Dragon, just go off the rails. You could also play stuff like Pot of Avarice in decks like this, but we'll get into that later, of course. The main strength of this deck is that it does get to abuse the strong Quick Draw Dandy synergies, and it does get to abuse the strong draw engine of Trade-In plus Cards of Consonance. The main downside to a deck list like this is consistency, and then of course weakness to stuff like Royal Oppression, which we'll talk about later as well. Next deck list. This is a deck list that I've been playing recently. This is my sort of what was used to call the Disaster Dragon deck list, but I think most people call it Trap Dragons now. It's just a dragon deck that plays a full suite of trap cards. I have recently added the DD Warrior Ladies to this deck list. The way this deck works is it plays almost like an aggro stun deck, kind of similar to Blackwings or Glads, where you summon a beater or a strong monster, and then you back it up with a bunch of trap cards. And then you also have an I Win button in Future Fusion, and you also have several I Win buttons in Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon as well. So this deck, it's a bit slower, it's a bit more grindy, it's a bit more resource intensive, but I think it has some of the best matchup against some of the meta decks because it does play the full 3 copies of Kawaki Mero Drago in the main deck. Drago is a house in the mirror match. It stops your opponent from summoning their Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragons, so Drago is obviously very good there. It also is insane versus Blackwings and Vayu, 2 of the most popular decks in the format. Prevents them from special summoning Dark Arm, prevents them from special summoning Gale, activating Vayu, etc. And then, of course, it's also insane against both Lightsworn and Zombies, which are the other most popular decks in the format. So this is probably the best 4-star monster you can summon in the entire format, and this is the type of list that looks to abuse that as much as possible. The secondary game plan of this deck is to utilize Totem Dragon and Red Eyes Wyvern to accrue marginal positional advantages. Usually you're not getting raw card advantage out of these cards unless you've activated something like Future Fusion, but they do give you positional advantages, and then you can use stuff like White Knight Dragon to beat your opponent down through back rows and invalidate a lot of their back rows. White Knight Dragon is disgusting. It's better than most of the synchro monsters you can summon in this format. It negates any spell or trap that targets it, so Phoenix Wing, Regeki Break, Brain Control, Soul Exchange, Icarus Attack, Deprison, etc., etc. The only things it's not stopping are Bottomless Trap Hole, Mirror Force, and Torrential. And as a result of that, we've got double copies of Starlight Road to help you protect yourself from Mirror Force and Torrential, so that when you do go Red Med and White Knight Dragon and your opponent tries to sweep your board away, you can Starlight Road, summon a Stardust Dragon, and then immediately go for an OTK. If you have Red Eyes plus White Knight Dragon plus a Stardust, it is over 8,000 damage. So yeah, this deck is disgusting. It's very, very powerful. The most recent innovation is adding DD Warrior Lady. This is something ProStorm and I had talked about. And DD Warrior Lady is really, really good because it shores up a lot of the weaknesses, which we'll talk about in the weakness section, that this deck used to have. Another thing that's good about DD Warrior Lady is that it banishes itself so that it doesn't conflict with your Totem Dragon's effect in the mid to late game when you really need to have that extra little boost from your graveyard to play around your opponent's Royal Oppression by like tribute summoning Red Eyes, or to play around your opponent's whatever, tribute summon your White Knight, or just get an extra body in play for whatever reason. You get the idea. In the sideboard, you've just got a bunch of anti-meta stuff. There's a system down in my sideboard of this list. We'll talk about why I think you need a little bit of extra hate for machines when you're playing a deck like this. The machine decks can give you trouble because they're not light or dark, so Drago doesn't really do that much against them, and Machina Fortress beats up on this deck pretty hard, so that's another reason why DD Warrior Lady is pretty good. But this is a list I've had some success with. I think I topped 2 tournaments. I got second place at 2 FLCs, and then I won a side event with it. So it's definitely a deck that can do some work. Okay, next list that we got to talk about. This is Hydro Pump and ProStorm's list from, I think it was RBET3. Hydro Pump got second place, I believe, and ProStorm got 7th place. So it was 2 top 8 finishes, the exact same 55 cards. This is the Deep Draw or Dragon Turbo or whatever. You've probably heard about this deck from someone or another. This is a combo style dragon deck. So it plays incredibly different from the past 2 lists that I've shown you. The way this list works is that you use Super Rejuvenation to basically stack your whole deck. It plays like Doomsday in Magic the Gathering, if you've ever played that. More or less, you try to draw your whole deck and then piece together a hand that's Giant Trunade, Lightning Vortex, Double Red Med, Debris Dragon, and then that's just game. You can kill your opponent with those 5 cards through just about anything in the format. There's very little that stops it outside of like Threatening Roar or chainable stuff like Waboku. So once you've pieced together those 5 cards, and then you'll have a discard, of course, for Lightning Vortex as your 6th card, you can kill your opponent through just about anything, which is nuts. The way this deck works is instead of using Future Fusion to try and get value like the previous lists with Red Eyes Wyvern, they'll use Future Fusion to send triple Whitestone and draw 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons. So they're using Future Fusion instead of as like a sort of jank Mizuki, build your own Mizuki situation. They're using it as a straight up draw 3 cards. And even though those cards are 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, which are bricks, you have Trade-In, which converts them. You have Lightning Vortex. You have Magical Stone Excavation, which converts them. And once you've discarded them to anything like Lightning Vortex, Magical Stone, Trade-In, etc., those count towards your Super Rejuvenation draws. There's easily turns in this deck where you draw your entire deck on the first turn of the game. It is quite a disgusting engine. This is a deck that nobody was really thinking about in Edison format. It's one that I know Hydro Pump has put a ton of work into. So I got to shout out him. Check him out, of course. He is on YouTube. And he has labbed this out, and this list is dangerous. It's very deadly. I've played against it a couple of times, and you're basically just like hoping you draw the interaction pieces that matter, or you're hoping that they brick, and that's really all you can do. A lot of Prage. In the sideboard, you've got 2 more copies of Draco. You bring them in when they matter. You got 2 copies of Wyvern, so you can bring those in to grind a little bit in the matchups where you need to be more grindy. They have My Body as a Shield, as well as Space Typhoon to help play through things like Royal Oppression. They have their own Royal Oppressions. One of the strengths of the Dragon deck is that your average monsters are actually insanely strong on their own. So even under Royal Oppression, you actually have really quality monsters, and you can beat your opponent down and lock them out at the same time. Royal Oppression's pretty good against Clouds. It's pretty good against that kind of stuff. Then, of course, Double Book of Moon, Lightning Vortex to help you deal with stuff like Vanity's Fiend, Royal Decree, Treacherous Trap Hole when you just need to pop some stuff like a Dupe Lock, and then, of course, Cyber Dragon for the machine matchup. You only play the one in this list because you can turbo into it very easily, and drawing multiple can be a brick in some circumstances. This is one of the few lists that does play Trigodia and Gores too, so it's very difficult for you to really press through them effectively unless you have your own Drago or Fossil Dyna or Vanity's Fiend. Deck is very scary. It's one of the best decks in the format for sure. All right, next list. It's put up a lot of tops too. All of these lists have done something in some tournament somewhere. At least until the 5th and 6th list. The 5th and 6th list are speculative, but this one also got top 8 at RBET1. This is the next list. This is something that people used to call Hopeless Dragon. I think people call it Dark Dragons now. It's mostly just a Dark Grepher, try to set up either a big Red Med OTK with Dark Horus or Dark Creator, or set up for a Norlaris sweep if you're in a bad position. So, the way this deck works, it was piloted by someone I believe by the name of Pizza. His name was Pizza. I think I remember it. You utilize Phantom of Chaos to copy your powerful effects to make up for the disadvantage that you lose off of Dark Grepher. So Dark Grepher, you're going in at a -1, sometimes -2 if you're pitching to special summon it, but Phantom of Chaos can immediately turn that -1 into pluses out the ass, and it can also turn those -1s into straight up OTKs if you're copying something like Dark Arm Dragon or the Dark Creator. The way this deck works is if you are ahead, you'll just go for like a Future Fusion, value Future Fusion, Wyvern back your Red Eyes. If you're behind, you'll go Phantom of Chaos, copy Skyscourge and Norlaris. Hopefully, along the way, you've set up some Wyverns or a Plague or something in your graveyard. Plague can help you set up for the Norlaris play because you'll stack something like a Dark Creator, a powerful card on top of your deck. And then when you copy Skyscourge and Norlaris, you'll nuke everything, and then you'll draw that powerful card that you've set up. Additionally, you could also activate a Future Fusion, set up a bunch of Wyverns, go for Norlaris, put everyone down to 0 cards. You draw 1 card, so you're immediately at +1. And then in the end phase, you can bring out some Red Eyes and put your opponent on a serious clock. Basically give them 1 top deck to stay in the game. So this deck is a little bit more all-in than the other strategies. Well, I'd say it's a little bit more all-in than the other strategies, but that's cap, because this one is even more all-in. But I think this one has a few pretty big weaknesses, notably the fact that everyone and their mother is playing DD Crow. But that being the case, if they don't have the DD Crow, then they just get owned, more or less. It's a very fast deck. You get to play Allure of Darkness, which is a strong draw card, as well as Card Destruction. You do miss out on Cards of Consonance, of course, but these two are arguably better draw cards. You get to play Rhoda for Grepher, so your deck is very, very consistent. You're going to see your powerful cards every single game without a doubt. You're going to see stuff thanks to Goldsark, thanks to whatever else, Future Fusion, you get the idea. In the sideboard, this one's got something that I'll talk about a little bit more in the options portion of this video. It's the viruses. These cards are deadly. They're probably some of the most broken cards in Edison format, and they're also some of the least fun cards in Edison format, in my opinion. These cards can end games immediately upon resolution, and that's just that. Oftentimes, that will be the case, especially if you're up against a deck like Fairies or Quick Draw or sometimes even Frogs or Blackwings. One Deck Devastation or one Eradicator Epidemic Virus can just end the game immediately. He's also citing extra copies of Electric Virus. We're going to talk about that little guy in the future. Triple Mask of Restrict. This helps you against Frogs, so that way they can't use their Substitoad, they can't use their Monarchs, or they can't use Vanity's Fiend, which is one of the biggest ways this deck loses is Vanity's Fiend. An early Vanity's Fiend can just there's really nothing you can do about it in a deck like this, especially in the main deck. There's no outs. In the sideboard, you've got 2 Lightning Vortex, but that's it. So going for the preventative measure with Triple Mask of Restrict. I think this list is good. I think this deck is good. I think it's underplayed. I think it's underutilized. I think one of the biggest issues with players playing this deck is that they'll go for Norlaris way more often than they should. Oftentimes, what you should be doing is going for value Phantoms. Just putting big monsters in play, pressuring your opponent that way, and only really go for the Norlaris play if you have to, or if you have a good grave setup and you know that you'll have the highest chances to win. Oftentimes, I'll see players play this deck. Turn 1, they'll empty their hand and go for the Phantom of Chaos Norlaris, but they won't have a grave setup. And when you're both top decking, a lot of the other decks in the format can top deck just as well as this deck, so I think it's not the best play to go for it turn 1 all of the time. The reason I think Pizza succeeded is because he was playing this deck in a way that was more passive, more reactive, and I think that that's something that definitely goes a long way with a deck like this. Okay, the next 2 lists are lists that have not really proven themselves. These are just lists that I've played on the channel before and had success with on the channel before. These are lists that I want to talk about just because I want to showcase some of the crazy options that you could dive into a little bit more with this type of deck. The first one I want to show you guys is a Vendalgian deck list. So Vendalgian, the Dark Dragon Lord, he's an 8-star dragon monster. If you negate your opponent's spell trap or monster effect with a counter trap, you can special summon it from your hand. In this list, we only have 2 counter traps. It's Solemn and Dark Bribe, but that does come up sometimes. This is a skill drain virus dragon deck list. This deck looks to abuse cards like Infernal Dragon and Vendalgian and Dark Horus, as well as the trade-in engine, to set up for a virus play in game 1. Oftentimes, if you do virus your opponent, they immediately lose if their hand is susceptible to that. This deck just looks to turbo out the viruses. It's kind of like the Norlaris deck list, if you think about it that way, but instead of resolving Norlaris and clearing everybody's hands, you just resolve the virus and clear only your opponent's hand. So it's a one-sided hand loop as opposed to a two-sided hand loop, and it is much less weak to DD Crow. These types of lists I think we'll see a lot more of in the future, especially as the format gets optimized. These types of lists have insane matchups versus some decks just because Game 1 Deck Devastation Virus is lights out for the decks that it's good against. You can also utilize this ability with Fusilier. You can set Fusilier and then tribute it to a virus in this format. I know that doesn't work in every format, but it works in this format, so yeah. Gore is also a virus target. This deck gets to play Dark Armed. This deck is just very deadly, very dangerous. You get a lot of free wins thanks to, of course, all of your insane bomb cards. And then the last list I want to show you is, of course, the 5-headed dragon turbo dragon deck list, which is sort of a Lightsworn dragon deck. Looks to abuse the milling power of the Lightsworns to break up your opponent's back row with Lila and Raikou. And then you go for a Dragon's Mirror on 5-headed. Oh, excuse me. Pardon me. Use the 5-headed dragon with Dragon's Mirror and, of course, Megamorph to go for a 10,000 damage attack. I only have 2 Upstart Goblins in this list because if you put your opponent at 10,000, that is exactly where they need to be for that Megamorph OTK. Upstart Goblin also comboing to make sure your Megamorph is alive. This type of deck seems really fun. There's a lot of cool synergies like Prime Material plus Honest, or you can use Gragonith to pierce your opponent. Lots of fun stuff you can do here. This list is just a prototype, of course, of a list that can actually do some serious work, but I think there's a lot of power here and a lot of merit to it. Mill some Wyverns, mill some Red Eyes, that's a lot of value. And then, of course, you got Judgment Dragon, so can't really complain about that guy. All right, those are the 6 lists I wanted to show you. Hopefully, it kind of shows you exactly what the deck does. Maybe not. There's a lot of gameplay on the channel. If you guys want to check out all of the Dragon videos on the channel after this, there are plenty of Dragon videos, and you can see exactly how I go about piloting the Dragon deck and how, honestly, the other players do too as well, because the RBET VODs are up, and you can literally watch these players on their top 8 runs here on the channel. So let's go ahead and get into some alternate options, some stuff that wasn't covered in any of these 6 deck lists, some stuff that I think is maybe fun or creative or could be good if the meta changes, who knows. We've got, of course, Twin-Headed Behemoth. This card is cute. I've never really found a use for it, but it has potential to do something kind of cool. If it was destroyed, it can come back in the end phase. That's a cool effect, and it's a dragon, so that's another option, right? Horus the Black Flame Dragon. This guy is pretty good. Unfortunately, well, fortunately, actually, I should say, Edison format isn't really dictated by powerful spell cards. It's a lot more about the effect monsters. So Horus the Black Flame Dragon, not the best in Edison format because oftentimes it just trades with a Raikou. A little bit awkward. But if you can find the right meta, maybe everyone's playing Dragon Turbo, everyone's playing 20 spell decks, and you can stick a Horus the Black Flame Dragon, either level 6 or level 8, it could be pretty devastating depending on the position. Mirage Dragon, another solid dragon. Your opponent cannot activate trap cards during the battle phase. That means no crazy stuff like Mirror Force, Deep Prison. I don't know. If that's something you want to play around, then you can use Mirage Dragon. If you want to utilize Honest a little bit more, Mirage Dragon's a light. You want to use Chaos Sorcerer, Mirage Dragon's a light, so maybe you could build a Chaos Dragon deck with this guy. Dragon Ice, this is an interesting card. I've never really found a use for it, but it's possible it does something. I don't know. When your opponent special summons a monster, you can discard 1 card to special summon this card from your hand or graveyard, which is really cool. This guy's interesting at combating synchro monsters. He makes sure you have stuff in play. I've thought about utilizing this card in not Dragon deck lists, but maybe it has some potential in Dragon deck lists because you could discard a big dragon, special summon him, then use him as fodder for a red med to bring back that big dragon that you discarded for his effect. Magna Drago, this is like one of the few tuner options we have. You can also get this guy off Mass Dragon. It's not very good. Just not very good to play a 2-star tuner. If anything, I would rather just play Plague. The only upside is that you can summon him and then banish him for red med, but yeah, I think it's just like a weaker option. It is an option, though. If you have a game plan that really needs you to make a synchro that takes a 2-star tuner, then go for it. Phantom Dragon I actually think is pretty good. This guy's pretty sweet. When your opponent special summons a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. 2 of your monster card zones cannot be used. That's fine. A lot of the time, you're going to have 2 to 3 monsters in play in Edison format anyway, so it's not really that big of a drawback. And 2300 monster for free is pretty big. On top of that, he's a level 8 and a light. Both really quality attributes to this card. Level 8, of course, for trade-in, which is an engine that you can play in these types of decks. And then a light for, Chaos Sorcerer or Honest, if those are cards that you want to utilize. So I think this card has a lot of potential. It hasn't seen much play in Edison format nowadays, but in the past, in 2010, there was a lot of speculation on this card. I know a lot of people were citing copies of it to help combat Gladiator B strategies or strategies that were like special summoning monsters in certain moments. Blizzard Dragon, I like this card a lot. I think this is a very underrated card in terms of like stun dragons. I'll talk about that in a second, but I think this guy's pretty good in those types of stun dragon deck lists. Being a water's not that bad either. You can do stuff with that. Once per turn, you can target 1 monster your opponent controls, cannot change its battle position or declare an attack. So you can just stun their big monster until you have a red med to deal with it, which is really nice. This guy, again, Dora, the Dragon of Destruction, level 8, Dark, of course, amazing. And then having 0 defense is actually really interesting because it means you can abuse it with cards like Recurring Nightmare. That's pretty cool. This guy usually works well in the Phantom of Chaos builds. He's more of a Dark Dragon strategy. He destroys cards on the field, and then, yeah, pretty much just sends himself to the graveyard in the end phase. Usually, you're not special summoning him, well, because you can't. You're not tribute summoning him either. You're just using him as a discard fodder for trade-in, and then you're copying him with Phantom of Chaos as a field nuke. But oftentimes, people have found that Norlaris is just better in those positions anyway. Hardened Armed Dragon, this guy's pretty cool. I have not really found a use for him in actual dragon decks, but he works well with like Obelisk the Tormentor and a few other fun cards like that. I could maybe see one of him in like the Quick Draw Dragon deck. That'd be kind of cool. Strongwind Dragon, this guy is great if you're having issues with defensive monsters like Raikou, or you just want to force through a shitload of damage. This guy's pretty great there. He's not the best option. I do prefer Prime Material Dragon for your level 6 type dude, but he has a lot of aggressive potential and is definitely another option. Vanguard of the Dragon, this card's interesting. You're not really going to talk about it. Genesis Dragon is really cool because you can create an infinite loop with Light and Darkness Dragon. I think that that's tight, but it's honestly a little bit underpowered. Light and Darkness Dragon is not very good anyway, so that's just kind of where we are. Now the next part of this, Thunder King Doomcal, I think there is a list where you could make it like a stun dragon deck. Basically, go back to this list here, this DD Warrior Lady list. Take out the Totem Dragons, take out the White Knight Dragon, add some stun monsters, add some Blizzard Dragons or something, just some extra normal summon dragons for your red med. You could have a stun dragon deck. I could totally see that being good. It shores up a lot of issues with the deck, which I'll talk about in a second, of course. I think Thunder King and Doom Caliber Knight are great cards. Treeborn Frog is interesting, especially if you're playing stuff like Horus level 6, Prime Material Dragon, or Strongwind Dragon. I think it's cool to just have a repeatable tribute fodder. Totem Dragon's usually better, but if for some reason you want to play stuff like Cyber Dragon, DD Crow, that kind of stuff, you can always play Treeborn Frog instead. He's just a little bit harder to get access to than the Totem Dragons because you can't send him off Future Fusion for 5-headed dragon. This next one is something I've used in a video. Advanced Ritual Art to send Red Eyes Black Dragon to summon Garlandolf, the King of Destruction. This is a cool engine. I think Garlandolf is tight. It helps you clear stuff like Dupe Lock, like Spirit Reaper. We'll get into that in the weaknesses portion, but it's solid. It also gives you a bunch of darks to set up your graveyard and gets you a dragon in the graveyard straight away for your Red Eyes Darkness Metal, which is cool. So I think that that's something that can be considered in the future as a alternate engine. Lets you play Manju to get card advantage too, which is pretty cool. And it also couples well with the viruses, like I have mentioned in the deck selection, deck options, deck list showcase portion of this. You get the idea. DDR, Escape from the Dark Dimension, great ways to get access to your red med. You immediately pick up the card disadvantage off DDR, thanks to red med's ability to special something back. So it's definitely a card worth considering. I think it's actually really insanely good if you can consistently get access to red med in your list. This is a card that's very underrated. I think it would have a home in the Dark Dragons list more than anything else because you are banishing your own cards frequently with Phantom of Chaos, as well as Allure of Darkness, Dark Arm Dragon, Dark Creator, etc., etc. As well as trap cards. Other trap cards. Not as well as trap cards. I'm not speaking super straight, but I'm not editing this, so we out here. Ultimate Guide vibes. We got Phoenix Wing Windblast, Karma Cut, Regeki Break, Discard Traps. These out everything in the format, more or less. Karma Cut doesn't really. It has to be a face-up monster, but it is nice that it banishes that and banishes all cards in the same name from your opponent's graveyard. This card's actually pretty good in the mirror. You can catch a red med and then just clear all of their red meds from the field and graveyard, which is pretty good. And it's also pretty good against frogs. You can catch all their Treeborns. You can cut off all of their dupe frogs, whatever. But I think Phoenix Wing Windblast and Regeki Break have the most upside if you're going to play the discard traps at all. There are a lot of good cards to discard in the deck between Red Eyes Wyvern, Totem Dragon, that kind of stuff. And just discarding a dragon in general is pretty good because Red Med can just bring it back for free. So you can easily recoup the disadvantage from the discard, but it is important to note that these are hard -1s, and oftentimes you don't really want to be playing too many of those in a deck that has to work a little bit harder outside of Future Fusion to find card advantage. I think we could see more of these discard traps in the sort of quick draw style build that has ways to make use of that thanks to Whitestone of Legend and Dandelion. Okay, what other options we got? Oh, Divine Wrath. This card couples really well with Vandalgian. If you Divine Wrath, you can discard a monster, negate a monster effect, special summon Vandalgian from your hand, and then special summon that monster back with Vandalgian's effect. So you basically get build your own Gladiator Beast War Chariot plus build your own Monster Reborn, which is pretty cool. But the issue with that is Vandalgian cannot activate in the damage step in this format. This would be insane if you could just attack into your opponent's Raikou, Divine Wrath, pitch a guy, special Vandalgian, special the guy, attack directly with both the guys, and just kill your opponent. That would be insane. But unfortunately, that doesn't really work. So I think that's one of the weaknesses with that. And then, of course, 7 Tools and Dark Bribe are options if you're playing something with Vandalgian. There are so many options this deck can play. There are just so many options. I honestly had trouble doing this portion of the guide because really you could add almost anything into a rough skeleton like this, like just having Red Eyes plus Wyverns plus Future Fusion, and it'd be good. I've even played the deck with like Machinas. I've even played the deck with Ancient Gear monsters. I've even played the deck with Gear Town, Mausoleum. I've played the deck with literally like such a wide variety of engines, and there's so much you can do with dragons. It really is just down to what you want to do, more or less. The deck is so deep, it's so diverse, and that's really part of the strength of this deck. A couple other options here in the sideboard. Imperial Iron Wall. It does conflict with Red Eyes Darkness Metal, but it makes your Totem Dragon infinite, which is kind of cool. Something to consider. Also stops Bottomless, Deprisoned Caius, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, DD Assailant and DD Warrior are like additional copies of DD Warrior Lady if you find that the 3 is not enough. And last, well, not last but not least, because we still got to do the where I think dragons are in the metagame. But second to last, and definitely not least, we got to talk about the weaknesses. So because the deck is so diverse, it is really, really, really hard to pinpoint one exact weakness. That being said, there are some cards that are pretty good against all variants of dragons, and I think these are some of those cards. Thunder King Ryo, it's going to be great. It's going to negate Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. It's going to get you a +1 straight up. It doesn't negate it if it's coming out of the grave off of Wyvern, but it'll negate it if it's coming from the hand. And I think this card is also good, particularly against the Whitestone builds, because it stops the Whitestone searches, making Future Fusion actually not that great in those decks specifically. Bottomless Trap Hole, can't go wrong with banishing a big monster. It's usually a win for you. DD Warrior Lady, same thing. Honest and Collude are pretty good because they help you get over the dragons. One of the things that the dragons leverage is their big strength. If you can find ways to either pump your monsters up even bigger than that, or you can find ways to use that strength against them using cards like Electric Virus, Brain Control, or Magic Cylinder, then you can really punish the dragon player for their deck choice. I think that these 5 cards have a unique place against dragons because they really kind of make their biggest strength actually not valid, or in some cases even a weakness. Dragon Capture Jar is very narrow, as are cards like Victoria, but I thought I'd mention them because they are obviously going to be good against the dragon deck. If you want to side specifically for dragons, you can side Dragon Capture Jar, Victoria, that kind of thing. Additionally, if your deck can support it, Level Limit, Area B, and Gravity Bind are going to be fucking insane against dragons because most of the monsters are just big levels. But again, there are very few decks that can support these 2 cards. The best one, I think, is maybe X-Sabers, so just something to keep in mind. In the past, Spirit Reaper has given trouble to the dragon deck, but nowadays, since the lists have adopted DD Warrior Lady, Lightning Vortex, that type of thing, Spirit Reaper is not that much of an issue, but I still thought I'd include it because it can buy you some time until they find their out, more or less. And then, of course, Machina Fortress, talked about this a little bit more. It is not a light or dark, and it's a huge monster that is a pain in the ass for the dragon deck to deal with. And then Vanity's Fiend, that can lock out their stuff. And I think, in general, just like Caius, Dupe Frog, these types of like Frog Monarch little guys are actually pretty good against the dragon decks, especially if they're playing the slower, like more stun builds. Against the Quickdraw builds, they kind of laugh at the Dupe Lock, they laugh at Caius, but against the Turbo versions, they laugh at Caius as well, but the Dupe Lock can be annoying if they don't find Lightning Vortex. It's just, you got to find the right thing. You got to really pay attention to what your opponent's playing in their dragon build, and then you got to have a plan for that. I think the issue with dragons is that they're just ridiculously versatile while they're also hitting you with really big monsters and giving you like 2 or 3 turns to do anything, really. A few other options that I think are good against some of the builds, but not all of them. Royal Oppression, I think this is good against more of the turbo builds, but I think it's worse against some of the more like stun aggro-y builds. I think it's great against the quick draw build, but I think it's actually pretty bad against the Dark Dragon build because they just Norlaris, wipe away your Royal Oppression, that kind of thing. Soul Release, again, this is only good against some of the builds. I think it's actually not that great against the stun builds because the only thing it's really trading with is Future Fusion, and that's if they don't bring something back on their turn. Against some of the other builds, like Turbo, it can be okay, but it's just really if you have a better card to replace. DD Crow, I think, is a little bit better than Soul Release because it can at least hit Wyvern on Red Eyes in the end phase. It can also hit Pot of Avarice, Magical Stone Excavation, that kind of thing. It's pretty good against all these types of decks in general. If you have a bad card you want to side out, DD Crow's not a terrible thing to bring in. It's just a little bit low impact. Oftentimes, when I'm playing dragons or playing against dragons, if I have DD Crow and my opponent has a Drago, for example, they're just hitting me with the Drago, and I'm looking at my DD Crow like, why did I even side this in? So, you got to be careful of that. Creature Swap, this can be good, but again, Creature Swap is a very high variance card. You got to be careful of it. But stealing a Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon feels pretty fucking good, so I had to include it. If there's one deck it's good against, it's dragons, right? If there's one deck where you're like happy to have Creature Swap, it's got to be this one. Fossil Dyna, it can be okay. Again, they can run it over with just about anything, or they can just wall you out with the Debris Dragon until they find they're out. But it does have some potential to do some stuff, help you go for game, that kind of thing, or clear a whole board of like Red Eyes, White Knight Dragon. It's pretty good in those circumstances as well. Similar to Vanity's Fiend, but the low stats make it not as desirable. Necrogardna is one of the ways you can survive in OTK against Dragon Turbo, which is why I think Necrogardna is worth including in this section. I think if your deck can support Necrogardna, you might want to consider it as an option. Decks like Zombies that maybe don't normally play Necrogardna might want to think about it if Dragon Turbo is giving you some issues. And then, of course, Injection Fairy Lily. This is kind of a meme pick, but it is stronger than everything the Dragon deck can summon, so gotta include it, right? And then for extra deck monsters, Colossal Fighter can give you trouble if you're playing Dragons, but if you have Drago and you're able to book the Colossal Fighter, then you just kill it, and it can't come back because of Drago. Bryonic can give you trouble because it can out your Drago, and it's a water, so they can summon it under Drago. And then, of course, XX Saber Gotems, I've included it because it's relatively easy to summon, and it can attack over just about anything in the Dragon deck. So just some stuff to mention, but in general, the Dragon decks are pretty resilient, and that's one of the issues with facing them. I think it's tough. You have to have a strong combination of some of your more powerful cards, like an Electric Virus, a Thunder King, etc., and then on top of that, you have to be attacking the game from multiple angles while not getting beat down by a Drago and having your primary game plan get shut out. Stuff to consider. Stuff to consider. All right, where do I see dragons in the metagame? Let's go to the last part of this guide. Last part of this guide is where do I see dragons in the metagame? I think moving forward, I think dragons will always be one of the best decks in Edison format. It will always be one of those decks that can just murder you, no matter who you are, because of Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon and Future Fusion. It can just steal wins. You can put out big monsters that outclass synchro monsters. Decks like Flamvel will work really hard, summon Stardust Thought Ruler, and then you'll just summon a Red Eyes and beat them. So it's kind of crazy. The boss monsters in the deck are stronger than most of the synchros in the format, and I just think that it'd be really hard to see a metagame without dragons being at the top. They just have all the tools. They have a really deep card pool. They have all the synergies. They have Future Fusion, which is very broken. They have all of the everything. They can build to play around anything. It is just one of the most versatile strategies you can get into in Edison format. And if it's something you're looking to get into and practice with, I would highly, highly, highly recommend this deck. I think it is easily one of the top 3 decks in the format, if not the best deck outright. In any case, hope you guys enjoyed this guide. It has been a long time coming. I tried to keep it pretty short. I know that in the past these guides have gone on pretty long. I hope you guys enjoyed the lists. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.